Hello, welcome to this latest iteration of the MMA Freak podcast. I am Matthew Salzer, and so today we're going over, and we're calling it the MMA Freak opinion because, as we know, I like to talk and voice my opinion. So today we are talking about, as you can tell from the topic, it's primarily going to be about the PFL, but I'm going to talk about MMA current events and stuff like that. So let's get started after this. Okay. Number one. So this last weekend we had UFC on ESPN, Moreno versus Ursig. And I'll just talk about the main event. Brandon Moreno versus Steve Ursig, and Moreno was able to control the majority of the fight and get a decision win. So I think this is probably going to be another step towards him possibly getting that title fight against Alexander Pantoja. And he's definitely, you could definitely make a case for him getting that again, considering he's won basically every fight since Pantoja. And well, actually, wait a minute. One thing I didn't double check on. Okay. I stand corrected. He did lose his fight right afterwards against Brandon Royval. But he's on 2 in a row. You could make a argument that he deserves that, considering that Royval also had a chance against Pantoja and lost. But we'll see what goes on there, because it's one of those things where matchmaking in MMA is one of those kind of situations where it's like it's gonna happen or it's not. That's just how it is. So we'll see what happens there. It was in Mexico City, so Moreno had the home field advantage essentially. So that was that. Coming up this weekend, we have another UFC on ESPN card, and it's going to be Josh Smith no, I don't know why I said Smith. I was looking at the name. Josh Emmett. I don't know what. Yeah, okay. Josh Emmett versus Lerone Murphy. Now, Emmett's coming off of basically a 16-month layoff. He had injuries and matchmaking, and as we said, matchmaking is just one of those things in MMA. But so he's coming back. He's challenged for the title before, hasn't challenged since then. So we'll see what happens in this fight. But on the other hand, we've got Lerone Murphy, who's undefeated. He's been in the UFC since 2019. Has notable wins over Dan Ige, Edson Barboza, and Ricardo Lamas. This could be his breakout fight. If he performs well enough, I could see him challenging for the winner of the winner of the featherweight fight. Sorry, I just drew a blank. Yeah, Alexander Volkanovski. I really don't know what happened there. Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopez in just in a few weeks. Yeah, this could definitely be his breakout fight. This could definitely result in him challenging for the title. This is the type of fight that these fight nights are basically for. It's one of those things where you've got kind of a perennial contender trying to get back there versus an up and comer. This is what these fight nights are for. Excuse me. So we'll see how this goes. This could definitely be his breakout fight. Then and those are the main two things that I had in terms of UFC. So then tomorrow we have the PFL. One last squirreling off is that I forgot to even put this down, but on Friday we have Invicta FC 61, Alessandra Ferreira versus Ana Palacios on CBS Sports. So, and that is the main fight that I'd like to talk about on that event. You have Alessandra, who's on a 4-fight winning streak. She just won the title, and atomweight is kind of one of those weight classes that's very much overlooked because it's essentially only the Japanese do it. It's not in the UFC, and I can understand why. The depth is not quite there. The only time that you see atomweight fighters in the UFC is when they're signed and they're going up to strawweight. That's kind of how I guess Dana White justifies doing a strawweight division is allowing is signing atomweights and bumping them up. So but Ana Palacios is no pushover either. She's on a 3-fight win streak. The only fight that she's on a 3-fight winning streak. 2 of those fights have been Bellator. So, and then she really she was one of those fighters that really established herself in Combate Global. So we'll see again how that fight goes. Yeah, we'll see how that fight goes. It should be a good fight. So, and then we're gonna do the PFL 1 preview, and so in the main event, it's so this is one of the things that we're gonna kind of talk about later. But the PFL, instead of doing the seasonal format and doing the tournament at the end of the postseason, it's just gonna be one tournament across the board. And the first of these tournaments is gonna be it's PFL 1 tomorrow, and they're gonna be doing all the fights at Universal, or at least for the first few events, they're gonna be doing them all at Universal Studios. And I guess it's just one of those. The pandemic kind of made residencies a thing, and some of these promotions definitely have not shied away from that. The biggest example would be the UFC, because they have the Apex. They have their own in-house arena. So they just, the majority of their fights are in the UFC Apex. They're gonna be doing the preliminary round, or the quarterfinal round of welterweights and featherweights, and the main event is gonna be Jason Jackson versus Andrei Koreshkov. Both former Bellator champions, and I guess they're kind of some of these fighters that are benefiting from the Bellator PFL merger, which has kind of been this steady process. Again, that's something I'll talk about in just a second. But this really should have been one of those fights that, in theory, should have been more of a if you were going to do an actual tournament, I would make the argument that these two should have been on opposite sides of the bracket. But this is just one. It's one of those things where they were probably trying to get a high-profile fight in there, and so they wanted something that'd be main event level. The other fight I want to talk to, and then just the fact that I'm not talking about the rest of these guys is just an example of how thinly seated the weight class is. Or at least the tournament is. I really think these two should have been on opposite sides of the bracket. But so at featherweight, which is a little bit more even, but I just want to talk about the one fight. At featherweight, you've got Jesus Pineda versus Adam Borix. Borix did challenge for the Bellator title in the past, and then you had Pineda, who won the 2023 PFL season at featherweight, but then he's pretty much been out with injuries over the past year. He was supposed to be in some kind of higher profile fights. I don't know if he was ever tapped to be in last year's tournament, or season, but he wasn't. I know that he was supposed to be in like some of the pay-per-views, like the PFL versus Bellator pay-per-view, and then the Battle of the Giants. He was supposed to be in that. Injuries took him out both times. Adam Borix also, because of injuries, hasn't exactly had the opportunity to be competing this last year either. And Borix, again, is one of those Bellator fighters that I feel like benefited from the merger. And so we'll see how this one happens. I'd say Pineda is the favorite in this fight, but again, it's one of those fights. What I was saying before is that the featherweight bracket is a little bit more evenly matched, but it is still one of those things where I feel like Borix, maybe not on the opposite side of the bracket, but maybe not a first round matchup for this. But that's kind of how I view that. And then finally, my main thing that I really wanted to talk about was the overall was all the changes that are going into the PFL season this season. And so the main thing is that, obviously, as I mentioned before, we're going from a season to from kind of a more traditional sports season, which is what the PFL was always hyping about, is that, we're going to since they so the thing that initially, when the ownership group that bought the PFL they bought the World Series of Fighting and then kind of turned it into the PFL. Initially, they just continued running it as the PFL, but since they kind of started this tournament format, that's kind of been their season format. That's kind of been their big thing, is, we have an actual, season, and we have a post season championship tournament, like how traditional sports goes. That's kind of been their whole gig. And but realistically, not to mention the fighters who specifically with the champions were getting $1 million. I think that was their total purse, is my understanding. They would fight, and that would basically total their purse, is I think what was happening, because fighters had to get paid in order to win, and you can't just sit on getting that $1 million till the end of the season. But the reality of the situation was that sustainable? Not to mention, you had fighters who were competing and then going to other promotions. Like I think a few of them did, and like Kayla Harrison is the best example. She's in the UFC now. Long term, I don't think that model, and for that reason, I can understand why they end up changing it. I don't think that model was not sustainable. Not to mention they weren't selling out these huge stadiums like the UFC was. They were selling out kind of smaller venues, and at that point it's kind of like, well, you don't have as much leeway. So it's one of those things where they were trying to do something different as kind of a gimmick, but it was just one of those things where realistically it wasn't working because I can't remember if it was last season or the season before where you had that giant drug bust, and half the guys were out, and then also you had injuries constantly coming up, so you had these fighters who theoretically were earning their way in, and then things just there were just it was like any system, like any sports system, it wasn't exactly perfect, and the flaws in it just came out a bit more than with in other situations. And so you just had this situation where it wasn't a perfect system, and they were just you had the various flaws coming up, and eventually they had to make changes, not to mention the fact that again they're buying out all these Bellator fighters, and you kind of had the Bellator fighters coming in and doing stuff, and that's kind of another thing that warranted the change, was the fact that they discontinued the PFL brand, and they kind of tried to continue doing the Bellator brand, and they kind of continued to try to do the Bellator model with the PFL Champions Series, the fight that was in January. And that's kind of another weird thing. There's a bunch of weird things going on. So they switched from a season where you had 2 fights, and then the top 4 fighters, originally the top 8 fighters, but then they went to top 4, where the top 4 fighters move on to the playoff bracket, to now they're just doing an 8-man tournament, and they lowered the prize money from $1 million to $500,000. And even with they're adding, because they added middleweight, probably to accommodate those, not just to accommodate the Bellator fighters, but you had Impa Kasanganay, who was too big for welterweight, but he was a little small for light heavyweight, even though he did very well at light heavyweight. He was more he was always more of a natural middleweight, so he's going down and doing that. And like I said, for a lot of the Bellator fighters, so they had middleweight, and they added middleweight, and they added bantamweight again to accommodate those what's it called, kind of like heavier featherweights in the PFL, and then also the Bellator fighters. And but there is a rather interesting thing going on with with this tournament in general. None of the tournament champions are returning, and that is kind of interesting. It's the fact that heavyweight, the champ's not returning. Light heavy. So there is one champ that is coming back, and that's the lightweight champ. I think that's Gadzi Rabadanov. But none of the champs are returning, and I'm wondering if that's because they're going to try doing another one of those like tentpole pay-per-view events. But also, I heard another interesting thing is that specifically from Luke Thomas, but so my understanding from Luke Thomas is that they're going to change it. So all the fights, at least in this first round, so I believe PFL 1 through 4 are all going to be the main tournament. But then after that, when you kind of narrow down and your pool, my understanding is they're going to continue doing the Bellator, and I still don't know why they're still calling it the Bellator Championship. It's like, it's at this point, you know, the PFL created 2 super fight championships specifically for their big pay-per-view cash cows of Francis Ngannou and Chris Cyborg. Proper name, last name Justino, or is it Venancio? I don't know. She's got like Santos, Justino, Venancio. But anyways, I can understand why people just call her Chris Cyborg. Anyways, but they've created that. And in a way, it has been kind of a merger of some of the Bellator championships, especially because Cyborg is the featherweight champion, or was the last featherweight champion of Bellator. So this could be considered kind of a merging of that Bellator championship into kind of a PFL championship. Not to mention the fact that PFL stopped doing the women's featherweight championship. They stopped the lightweight championship. They stopped the featherweight championship. So, so we've got that, and and then of course the thing about Francis Ngannou is he went against I think it was Renan Ferreira, who had beat Ryan Bader in the Bellator versus PFL thing, and Ryan Bader's been let go. That's another thing, is that since this is that there's been a lot of both PFL and Bellator fighters that have been let go. I think PFL's kind of just become aware of the fact that they just don't have the money like the UFC does in order to put on massive amounts of cards. The UFC puts on like what, 3-4 fights a month in a month that has 4 or 5 weekends, and there's I think they've got like, they're not in the thousands yet, but they've got like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fighters that are putting on these fights and going on to these fight cards, whereas the PFL just, quite frankly, doesn't have the money. So they're going in there and they're having to put on all these fights, and I can understand why they ended up trimming the fat. But of course, ironically enough, giving way for GFL to fight, sign all these fighters who they're kind of trimming away, as long with recent UFC cuts. But we'll get into GFL later. But so they're doing this. They're putting on these single tournaments, and then they're cutting a bunch, not just cutting fighters, cutting a bunch of the Bellator champions. They just let go, they let go Patricio Ferreira, better known as Patricio Pitbull. And then he got signed with the UFC. They just let go Ryan Bader. No word where he's going. And he was the last Bellator heavyweight champion, in a way that his championship kind of got merged with Renan Ferreira's PFL versus Bellator belt, which kind of got merged with Francis Ngannou's heavyweight PFL heavyweight super fight belt. So we've got a bunch of these mergers going on there. Then we had Liz Carmouche, who I still think is technically still considered the reigning Bellator champion. I'm just like, what are they doing with that? And why are they still calling it the Bellator, the Bellator championships? And then we have Usman Nurmagomedov. He defended his Bellator title against Paul Hughes at that. But then, like I said, I think they're going to continue using these Bellator championships. I guess that's what they've got to change the name at some point. You're not using the Bellator name anymore. You got to change it. It's like just convert them to the super fight titles. You've got that lineage. But of note is let's see, who else did they let go? They let another champion go. I forget who. This is one of those things where I should have kind of kept the notes, but let's see. So they let Bader go. So as champion. The light heavyweight championship still active. Corey Anderson is still the light heavyweight champion. Middleweight champion Johnny Eblin is still the middleweight champion. The welterweight championship still active. Ramzan Kurmagomedov won that from Jason Jackson. Usman just defended his title under the PFL banner. Patricia Pitbull, like I said, just asked for his release. He got it. And I've also heard Patchy Mix isn't happy either, and he wants to get let go. So and then we got that weird thing with Liz Carmouche going on. So we've just got a bunch of but like I said, my understanding is so I think the hint is that, they were using a bunch of those former last season PFL champions. I think the reason why they have a bunch of these champions not fighting in the tournaments anymore, like I said, the only champion that came back was the lightweight champ. The lightweight champion, Gadzi Rabagomazov. I think the reason why they're doing that is because maybe the champions from last season are going to start challenging. So they're basically going to do like what Bellator was doing towards the end of their champion format. So they're basically gonna those tournament winners are going to get a shot at the titles, which again, I think they should just rename the super fight titles. Because at this point, kind of keeping them is pointless. But they did kind of solve some of those issues with kind of ongoing titles in that like for the first one I could think of is that like for example the four belts, we've kind of, like I said, we've kind of got that things figured out with I don't know what they'll do with the what's it called, with featherweight, since Patricio Ferreira, aka Pitbull, is gone and he's in the UFC now. Don't know what they'll do with that. Maybe they'll just continue doing a normal championship there. They'd already done away with featherweight, and then they merged belt, the Bellator with Cyborg and PFL and the PFL Super Fight Championship. So they kind of solved that. Not only have they sort of unofficially merged things with heavyweight, but then they let Ryan Bader go, so that you kind of got that situation down. So essentially, there's no real conflicts in terms of the Bellator championships. So if they were to do that thing where they do have fighters where they have those fighters doing that situation, then I think it might still work out with essentially doing where the previous season tournament champions get the challenge for the titles. But we'll see what happens there. And then, yeah, those are kind of all the major changes in terms of PFL. And then, so the prize money. So that kind of reduces the budget, because even with adding 2 weight classes, you've got heavyweight, light heavyweight, middleweight, welterweight, lightweight, featherweight, bantamweight, and women's flyweight. So you've got 8 weight classes. You have that. That's only $4 million, as compared to back when they were doing, I think, 5. Yeah, they were doing 5 tournaments. That's $5 million, or was it 6? Let's see. Heavyweight, light heavyweight, welterweight, lightweight, featherweight, women's division. Yeah, that was 6 million. So they're already, having to shell out like, $4 million less. And then but they've also got these you've also got the European and the Middle East, Africa tournaments, but I don't think those payouts are as big. So yeah, that's just a focus on the the PFL changes. They're switching from tournaments away from that. They stopped they switched away from a season to just a straight up tournament. They went from keeping Bellator to, I think what's going to happen is kind of to bridge those slow seasons. They'll probably still keep doing the Bellator Champions Series, kind of, like what they did, where when it's in between, they could just do a fight card with putting one of the champions on it to headline, kind of in between. So we'll see how those changes kind of help PFL in the long run. And the reality is with Bellator, we knew that the writing was on the wall. Once they sold it, they were running things down. The reality is, if another if another MMA promotion buys another MMA promotion, one of 2 things happens. They either just merge all the assets in, like with what the UFC did to Pride, which was not originally what the UFC wanted to do. They wanted to keep running Pride, but the problem is, once the Yakuza connection was out, it was out. And the UFC, the Japanese public didn't want anything to do with that. So you either do that, or you do what the UFC did with WEC, where you run it kind of to develop certain stuff. Like, they end up focusing primarily on running their their lighter their lighter divisions, like the featherweight and bantamweight divisions in the UFC today, are specifically because of the WEC. They're descended essentially from those 2 divisions. So and then basically all of women's MMA is a result of Strikeforce. So and like I said, you're starting to see the DNA of Bellator, even if it is kind of older Bellator, like I've kind of affectionately called Bellator under Scott Coker essentially Bellator 2.0 or Strikeforce 2.0, if you want to call it that. But that's essentially what it became. Is you, like I said, you see that DNA from Bellator, even if it's older DNA in the PFL now. So or you could even say that it was no, it wasn't really the DNA. The World Series of Fighting started doing tournaments, but they weren't doing these like seasonal tournaments. Essentially, that was always just a Bellator thing. So we knew the writing was on the wall the moment that Bellator was bought by PFL, and Paramount essentially got tired of running it. I think it was making money, but they just got tired. It's kind of like how with Strikeforce. Strikeforce was making money, but Silicon Valley Entertainment Group just wasn't interested in running it anymore. So they sold it away. That's just it takes a lot of effort into running an MMA promotion. And if you just don't have the heart for it, it's, if you want to even go further, the Monday Night Wars, WCW. But then again, WCW kind of was the majority of its life. I don't think it ever made money. It was only during the height of the Monday Night Wars when they were the ones who were winning against WWF at the time that they were actually making money. But yeah, it takes time, money, and effort into running an MMA promotion. And if you're just not into that, then you're not into that. And I think it was one of those things where maybe Paramount at the time that Paramount bought Bellator, they may not have thought about the long-term time and effort into doing all that. And here we are, about a decade. I think it was about a decade. It was about a decade under Paramount ownership, but it got sold off, and PFL was only going to run it for so long, and you saw what happened. They primarily ran it as overseas cards. I think maybe under PFL you maybe had one American card, but so we'll see how those changes benefit it. And we'll see that the seasonal debut tomorrow night. So thank you for tuning in to this. So I did it live because I just wanted to be able to get it over with and be able to get it up there. Maybe I'll be able to do it at a time when someone can actually tune in. I know that the broadcast time isn't exactly ideal for people, but maybe in the future I'll be able to do it at a time when, again, someone will be able to tune in live and actually watch it. So thank you very much. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Trying to be a little bit more active. Check out our social media. Thank you very much for tuning in if you do tune in, and we'll see you next time.